Amen. So in yesterday's class, we began discussing why it is that the Levites are not joining the movement at this moment. So it brought forth a few questions that some people think they will join. In fact, who is it that's joining from now to Panium if they're not Levites? Are they still priests? We want to discuss that issue. And then what we asked is, what's the definition of a priest, Levite, or Nethinim? So we just want to refresh our minds about that. What is a priest, Levite, or Nethinim? My sister? Sorry? Can you tell us what a priest or a Levite or a Nethinim are? How did we explain it yesterday? If you're not sure, tell me and I'll help. Speak a little bit louder. So the priests are those who are called out of the church. How do you call a priest out of the church? What's the mechanism for doing that? Not sure? So, to call someone out means to call. When you call, you have to speak. So what are you saying to them? You're giving them a message. I think you said the message. I said change it to a message. What is the message that you're giving to them? You're giving them the first angel's message. Yeah? What does that say? Or what is the first angel's message? Okay? So that's verse 7 that you've quoted from, Revelation 14. What does verse 6 say? You can look if you're not sure. Don't read the verse to me. I know what the verse says. I want you to tell me, what are you saying to people? What message are you giving them? Good. So, right here we put e.g. you're giving the everlasting gospel to the church. My brother, what church is that that we're speaking of? Yeah, what church is that? So we're going to the Seventh-day Adventist church and we're saying to them the everlasting gospel. And obviously they're going to be offended by that because they already believe that they're giving the everlasting gospel to the world. Now this everlasting gospel that we're going to give to them is going to call out a people. And the people that it calls out are what we call priests of this movement. So, if we're going to say to them the everlasting gospel, first angel's message you quoted as verse 7, you said, fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come. So that's the message that we're going to give. Then, After that work is done, we're going to call another group out from the church that we call Levites. Once that work is complete, then what happens? What happens, brother?
Sorry?
What happens after you've called the priests and the Levites out?
We call another group. We go to the world, give the same message, everlasting gospel. Then we get the Nethinim.
Okay, so the people that we're going to call out from the world are called Nethinims in this model. Sister Schneider, give us some other phrases or titles for Nethinims. It's the same thing. As she's calling these out, if there are any that are unfamiliar to you, keep a thought in your mind. Well, it can't be the world because they're coming out of the world.
I think those also the ones I
Okay? So have a think if you know any more. Brother? Sorry?
The unclean.
The unclean? Sorry? God's people. Brother?
Emma, Edom, Mob.
My sister in the red top with the glasses.
Mine has already been said by the Gentiles and live in our workers.
Can you think of any more?
No.
No? Okay. So carry on putting your hands up. Samaritans. Any more? You had lots of hands up here a minute ago. What ones were you going to say? Okay, that was the one. Okay. So, there may be more. I'm sure there are. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 8 here. Can anybody think of any more? Sorry? Wheat. Someone said something? The heathen. Okay, I'm going to put heathen with the Gentiles. Were you going to say the same? Someone else had their hand up. The same thing. Anyone else? Uncircumcised. You want to put that with the unclean? Is that who said? Did someone say that?
What's the difference between 10 tribes and Samaritan?
So, who said that? So the 10 tribes we have here, and then we had Samaritans. So my brother wants to put those two together. Okay, so someone wants to put the 10 tribes with Samaritans. So I'm going to hold that thought. Someone had their hand up.
I would say remnant.
Who?
Remnant.
The remnant.
I lost you.
Other sheep. Good. There's so many, aren't there? When you start looking, there's so many. My sister with the white top and red. Yeah? Sorry? Oh yeah, you didn't know what the question I was going to ask yet. Just going to ask you a question. Okay, not asking for the list. So, one of the brothers over here said 10 tribes and Samaritans. Could you explain that? Could you explain why he wants to put them together? The 10 tribes and the Samaritans. So I guess what my question is, to be specific, is who is a Samaritan?
Basically, the Samaritans were those from the northern kingdom. They're called Samaritans.
So let me stop. So the Samaritans were those from the 10 tribes. They came from a place called Samaria.
I think that is the reason why he wants to put the 10 tribes and the Samaritans.
Okay, so he wants to put the 10 tribes of Samaritans because they're the same group of people. Is that what you're saying? So, what does this teach us? My sister? This black dot. What did this teach us? We've got so many titles for this group. What can we learn from that? Not sure? You've not understood my question. So we call them Nethinims, but now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've got 10 other titles for them. What do we do with that? What use is it for us? Not sure? Where does the word Nethinim even come from? Maybe not every place, but give us one place where you get that term from. Do you know what story or what book? No? Okay, I'm sure you do. When someone tells you, you'll remember. My sister next to her, do you know? What book or what story do we find Nethinims from?
The book of Ezra.
Book of Ezra. You knew that? Yeah, I knew you knew that. So we take that from the book of Ezra. So if this is Ezra, here, Ezra, where's this taken from? Put your hand up. The 11th hour workers, where's that taken from? My sister? Matthew 20. So can someone just double check it's Matthew 20? If it is, someone just say yes. The first person to say yes, that will be enough. So we're just going to check it's Matthew 20. We'll just go with the chapter. Yes? Okay, so we've agreed it's Matthew 20. So we've got Ezra. We can go to Ezra 7, chapter 8. Chapter 7, chapter 8. And we've got Matthew 20. Is that what we said? So what is this teaching us when we've got so many titles? Sister Joy. They're a significant group of people. Anything else? Everyone's significant. You're significant, aren't you? And you're not part of that group. In fact, we're probably more significant. And I'm pretty sure that they've got more titles than we have. I don't think you'll find 10 for us. You might find a few, but probably not that many. And I guess we would argue that we're more prominent than they are. Would you agree we're more prominent than them? Yeah. What word did you use? You didn't use significant. Why are we more significant than them? Speak a little bit louder.
Because we harvest them.
Because we harvest them. Could you give us a bit more about the harvest issue?
We are the ones going to tell them to come out of Babylon.
We're going to tell them to come out of Babylon. Just take on the harvest theme. Why are we more significant than they are? Mr. Rogers? I've said we're more significant. She said they were significant. Then she spoke about harvest.
So I comment on harvest.
Yeah. Our relationship to them with respect to harvest.
I think we are the angels that harvest and takes them to the barn.
Okay, so we're the angels that harvest them, which is the same answer that she gave. Looking for another answer. Anyone else? Put your hand up if you can think. Another answer?
I think we are harvested and shall harvest them.
We are?
We shall be harvested and shall harvest them.
So we shall be harvested and they will be harvested. So the second thought you said is we will harvest them. That's the same thought that they have. Just wanted to pick up the first thought. Anyone else besides Sister Snyder?
I think we are joining before the harvest and then joining after.
We're joining before the harvest. Joining what before the harvest? Okay, I don't think that would make us more significant. Brother Rogers?
If you look at the line of the priests, at the second level prayer, we go out to work for the Levites. And we are the same for the 1 for 4,000, means at our second level we go out to work. We teach the universe.
So, let's turn to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 40. Hebrews 11 verse 40. So, remember my question. What's the key word in my question? Shout out. Significant. That's the key thought. Okay? So you read the verse.
God having provided some.
Don't read it out loud. Just read it quietly to yourselves. As you're reading the verse, I want to apply a rule now. Okay, one of William Miller's 14 rules. So I want us to think about the rule that we're going to use as we're reading this. We're in Hebrews 11 verse 40. And we want to apply a rule here. Now, see there are 14 rules. And I'm sure most of you have watched a study or a presentation that either I guess I would have done, about William Miller's rules. And you probably know that I have some favourites ones. And I didn't just make up those favourite ones. They're given to us through inspiration. When Ellen White comments on Miller's rules, she mentions the first 5, that she writes them out, and she says, this is just a portion of all the other ones. Okay? So if you were to read that statement as an Adventist, you'd say, oh, she's just doing the first 5, she doesn't want to waste the paper, and she doesn't want to quote the other 9. But as students of prophecy, we would look a little bit deeper, and we would see some significance in why she would do that. Would you agree with that? Yeah, we'd look a little bit deeper. Why would she do 5 and not 6? Or 7 or 3? Or not even mention any of them, just say there's some rules and you should study them. She mentions 5. So I think there's some significance in that 5. Now, what approach would you make if you were to see those 5? First one we could say is, she just mentions 5 because she doesn't want to waste paper. I think that's not a very good answer, but that would be one that everyone could say. It's just an example. That would be the first answer example. What could we say about that when we saw she's listing out those 5? What could we say about her choice of those rules? Anyone got a thought? We've got plenty of rules, laws, methodologies that we use. So start thinking about what you know and why it would be 5. What could we glean from the 5? Just like we did with the Nethinims. 5. My brother?
I think what she was doing, if she was like maintaining the paper so that she was not ready to mean that she had some.
Speak a little bit slower so I can get.
I was like, if she was appearing to waste the paper, mean that she has summarized the whole information in that file.
Yeah, so we agreed that there's some significance to that. So she's not just wasting paper. Of course she wouldn't do that. There's some significance. So my question is, what significance do we think she was having? My brother? You? Yeah? Any thoughts? You? Yeah? Yeah?
Sometimes the summary of all the other.
Oh, sorry, this one, my brother here. You're not sure yet? Okay, who spoke? Go ahead.
Those 5 rules, I think, the significance is that they open a light and they share it. They just repeat it. They just repeat it and they lighten the other rules.
Okay, so my brother's saying that these 5 rules are repeated and enlarged in the other 9. Yeah? Do you know that for certain, or you just saying that's something we could explore?
I know that.
Okay, so you've looked at it before. So he's going to say we can see repeat and enlarge. Anyone else?
I'm seeing a pattern in the way Ellen G. White is listing the rules. She lists the first rules, meaning the pattern I can see there that she's giving the first one, the first 5 rules.
I'm not sure what you mean when what you've said. She's listed the first 5, and what's she trying to show us?
So when Miller wrote down the rules, rule number 1 was number 1, rule number 2 was number 2, like that. So Ellen G. White is doing it in the same pattern.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay, so we know she's doing exactly the same thing. She hasn't changed anything. So we've got repeat and enlarge happening. Right, Rogers?
So if I can look to the significance of the number 5, it means maybe.
So we'll stop there. So automatically we should have seen that there were 5. And we all know at least a couple of things about the number 5. So that's an easy one that we should have all honed in on. That why should she pick 5 and not 6 or 3? So have a think about why there was 5 that she chose.
And among other things, the number 5 can represent foundation.
Okay, we'll stop there. My brother, why is 5 a symbol of foundation? Not sure? My sister at the end? Do you know why 5 is a foundation? No thoughts? My brother?
I think when Christ is starting to choose the disciples, I don't know why you say 5 is a foundation. We get that Christ first chooses the 5, the first disciples from John.
Okay, so 5 is a foundation because these are the 5 disciples. And Ellen White says in which book? In The Desire of Ages. Do you know the page?
141.
Excellent. 141. 2. In Desire of Ages, that these form the foundation of the church that Jesus was creating. And the foundation, the 5 disciples, there's something else about them which my brother said is, what's the other characteristic about them? Sister Veronica? The 5 disciples, they form their foundation. What's special about them compared to the others? Not sure you don't remember what he said or you couldn't hear him.
Why are they important?
There was something significant about those 5. Not sure?
They're the first one.
I'll just ask your sister Monica. Sorry. It's very difficult to point.
In fact, I don't know the reason, but they were the first disciples to be appointed.
They were the first ones. That's why they're the foundation. Why were they chosen as the first ones? That's you're not sure about. Sister?
I mean, as you look at their names, I think it suggests how they become a foundation.
Okay. He already gave the answer to it. I don't know if we all picked it up. Brother Manjit? Older Manjit, sorry. Why these 5? Where these 5 come from? They're the foundation. Who are they? I'm not asking for their names yet. Okay. At the back, someone put their hand up.
Yeah. I was trying to see if I can parallel that one.
Could you stand up? Because I can't see. Sorry, at the back.
I was saying,
Yeah?
I was trying to parallel the first 5 rules that she was dwelling within. I was trying to parallel it with the first 4 laws, 10 commandments, if it can rhyme. But by the time I put up my hand, there was a point missing there. That's why I put up.
Okay. That's fine. My brother.
They had a transition from the first messenger to the second.
Okay.
So that's why they are significant to me.
The same answer.
What is the answer?
That you asked that where
Just give us the answer.
they came from, the first messenger.
Okay, so what makes these special is they were all John's disciples. These first 5, they were all John's disciples, and so it shows a clear transition from the first messenger to the second messenger. And they're the foundation. That means they're the beginning of the work. I've got repeat and enlarge, foundation. Anything else?
Wisdom.
Sorry?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. How do you get wisdom is 5?
Okay. If I go back to the book of Matthew 25, I see the 5 wise written and the 5 foolish.
Good. So we'll do the 5 wise. So 5 is a symbol of wisdom. You okay with that? If we're going to do wisdom, we could do, what could we add with that? Understanding, knowledge.
I just wanted to say that I think the reason why they can be wise is because they listened to what John said and they went to Christ.
Good, so their wisdom is that they had already attached themselves to the first messenger and they then went to the second. So that could make them wise. Anything else you could do?
I see that as the 5 fingers of God with the right hand, the 5 full marks.
So this is God's hand. Sorry, my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the hand of God. Yeah? So I like that. That's really good. Have you heard that?
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out why she quoted the first 5, why we have 14. So I'm going to say it's a symbol of a tool to understand the remaining one. The reason why I'm saying that.
Stop for a minute. So she chooses 5 from the 14 is because they're a symbol of a tool. Okay, so these 5 are a symbol of a tool. And you're saying that because?
Because I was going through the book of 1 Samuel chapter 17.
1 Samuel 17.
Yeah, the narrative of David and Goliath. And David goes to the brook and chooses 5 smooth stones. And there were many stones in the brook. but he decided to choose 5 of them. So I was asking, why did he choose 5? And from those 5, his intention is going to confront Goliath with those 5 as a tool. So that's what I'm thinking.
I'll do one more. This is not connected to the number 5, but we'll do Alpha and Omega. First and the last. So, what is the first rule? So every
word must have its proper bearing on the subject presented.
So every word must have its proper bearing on the subject that we're discussing, the subject at hand. And number 5? Someone else? My sister with the grey top. Rule number 5. Do you know what that says? So the Bible is its own expositor. So every word must have its proper bearing, and the Bible is its own expositor. And someone said it was the foundation, and we know that, perhaps many of us do, rule number 5 and rule number 14 are basically the same rule. The Bible being its own expositor, that's essentially what rule 14 says. So what I want to do is go to rule number 1, and we want to change it a little bit. It says every word has its proper bearing. So we know what bearing means, hopefully. My sister with the black jacket. What's bearing mean? We'll do her first and then you. This one first with the buttons and then bearings. Proper bearing, what does that mean? Sorry? Direction. So bearing means direction. So every word should have its proper direction. My sister? Not sure? Someone on the back row. Oh, my sister there, right on the back row. What does bearing mean for you? A little bit louder. The intent or meaning. My brother? Position. So we've got position and direction. One more I'm looking for. My sister? Weight. So remember, these are English words that were written around 200 years ago. And sometimes it means all of these things. Sometimes those words have a slightly different significance than which we would place upon them. So today, I think if we said bearing, most people would think about direction, like a compass. But I think the way the word bearing is being used here is weight. So if I could use weight, another word that we could use is one that we used before, the one that Sister Joy gave us, which was what? Significance. So every word has its proper significance. Are we okay with that paraphrase of rule number 1? Yeah, rule number 1. Every word has its significance. Now, of course, every word has its significance, because if you create a sentence, you need to have words in their proper position. If it's a noun or a verb or something, every word should have its proper place. So, for me, having that understanding of rule number 1, actually I don't find that useful. So I want to change that rule slightly, the way we would think about it, and not for us to say every word has its significance, but I want to change it to say that in a statement, in a phrase, there is one word, sometimes it may be 2, depending on how the English works, that is the most significant. So I want us to think about rule number 1. not as that every word is significant, but to think about it, what is the most significant? If you're okay with that? Who doesn't understand what I've just done? Put your hand up if you're not sure how I've changed that rule. So everyone is okay. My brother? You haven't understood? Okay. So the rule says every word is significant. And where are we? We're in Hebrews 11:40. So in English it says, God having provided some better thing for us. So every word is significant or has its significance. God having provided some better, etc. So every one of those words has its significance in that sentence. Now, some are more significant than others, obviously. Some of them are just put in there, and they're not in the Greek. They're put in there to actually make the original statement have any sense in the English. So I would suggest some of these words actually don't have much significance at all. They're just there to make the sentence work properly. If you went back to the Greek, you wouldn't find a one-to-one parity. So I've just read, God having provided some better thing. 6 words. There aren't 6 words in the Greek. I'm almost certain there won't be. It'll be much less than 6. So we've added words in to make the sentence meaningful for us. So if we use that rule as is, if I were to ask you, what is the significance of the word having or have, I'm not sure that we'd actually glean that much information. It would be significant. We could actually do that if we were going to say God having provided. So if I were to ask you what does the word having mean, what significance does it have in this structure, I think we wouldn't have probably a meaningful answer. So what I want to do is to suggest something else. A more practical, pragmatic way of using this rule number 1 is not to say that every word is significant, which it is, but to find the most significant. To find out which word or phrase is the most significant in that sentence as we have it there. And if we could do that, what we would find is the intent of the author. We want to try and understand what is Paul teaching us in this verse. And in order to understand that, I don't think you'd look at the word having. You'd look at something that's actually important, which we would perhaps call the theme of the sentence. Does that make a little bit more sense of what I'm saying? Yeah? So we want to look at the most significant, or what we might call the theme or the point of the verse. Now, of course, when you do that, there's a problem. It's not so straightforward, first of all, to even understand which is the most significant word or phrase. But it's worse than that, not being able to understand what's most significant. What is the problem with that? Do you got any thoughts, my sister? Tell us. Before you answer, what I want to do is ask the class, what is the most significant word or phrase in this verse? Already what you've seen is I've modified the rule from every word is significant to the most significant. Then I modified it by saying what? So I said it 2 or 3 times now. I said word or I said word or phrase. So I've even changed the rule to it not having to have one word only. I want to change it from phrase. Does everybody know what a phrase is? Just a collection of words. I want to change it from phrase to what? No, I've gone from word to phrase. Put your hand up. Not a sentence. A phrase is not a sentence. The sentence would be the whole thing. A theme. We'll go with that. We'll go with from a word to a theme. And I just want to go one step forward to a thought. If we're okay with that. I want to go from word to phrase to thought. So what we want to understand when we look at a sentence using rule number 1 is the most significant thought. Does everybody following along with my thought process? We go from the word. Every word is significant. I don't find that particularly helpful because you could start looking at things that are of no value. And what you will see that all of you will do when you use rule number 1 is you will end up gravitating to this way of thinking. You're going to look for what's the most significant, even without you thinking about it. So instead of saying the most significant word, I said the most significant word or phrase, which means a collection of words. The reason I said that is because sometimes a word itself does not help you to understand what is the most significant thing. Because some of those words need something attached to them to get an idea or concept of what I've called thought. So I'm saying rule number 1 is to understand the most significant thought in, we've got a verse here or a paragraph or a chapter or the whole book, whatever it is, we want to understand the most significant thought. So if you went to the Conflict of the Ages series, we all know the titles for them? Do we all know what I mean by the Conflict of the Ages series? The 5 major published works of Ellen White. Where would you find rule number 1? Where would you look to, Sister Emma, for rule number 1? If you're going to do that. Yeah, I've given you 5 books. I'm saying, where do you see rule number 1 being used? Sorry? Now, I've given you all 5 books. What's book number 1 called? Okay. And the last one? Okay, so where would you look for what's the most significant thought?
In the first book.
When you think about all of them. Okay, so anyone else? I was suggesting the titles of the books. So the titles have been carefully chosen to tell you what the significant thought of each one of those books is. Number 1, the subject or the thought is about patriarchs and prophets. And you go on. So the middle book, The Desire of Ages, the most significant thought about that whole book is what? It's the story of Christ. And it's where in the Conflict of the Ages? Midway, right in the middle. So you've seen presentations on 2520 where it talks about in the midst of the week you have the cross. The Conflict of the Ages, the books themselves guide you in the same direction. Christ is the centrality of everything. It's the middle book. The most significant thought is in the title itself. The title was carefully thought about. Okay, so are we all okay with getting rule number 1 and changing it from... Sister, what's rule number 1 say? No, your original version.
Original version?
Yeah.
Every word must have its proper bearing on the subject presented.
Every word must have its proper bearing upon the subject presented. So we're going to change that to say the most significant thought. Not every word, but we're just going to look for the most significant word. We've gone from bearing to position, direction, weight to significance. So there's one more bit we want to add to this. Because I want to ask you, what is the most significant thought here? And how are we going to find that? How are you going to find what the most significant thought is? Before you start looking, there's one more bit, one more piece to the rule. There's one more piece to the rule. Brother Robert, there's one more piece to that rule. We've got the most significant bit. We changed that. You're okay with that, I hope. What's missing? I want to use the rule itself to go back to analyse what we're talking about. We've got this bit, the most significant thought. Now, we've done the first bit. There's something else that's missing from that rule. What bit's missing? I want you to give me the word or the phrase from the rule itself. Are we all okay with that? Do we understand what he's just said? Okay? That was the bit that was missing. The subject. So what we want to do is, we want to take that concept and introduce it into our rule here. So if I were to ask you, what's the most important thought of Hebrews 11:40? One second. My sister, with the white top and the striped sleeves. I'm talking to my sister, sorry. Yeah? Talking to you? So my question to you is, my question to you is, what is the most significant thought in Hebrews 11 verse 40? Be careful how you answer. What should she be doing? Someone put their hand up. Tell her what she should be doing. Who's putting the hand up? You going to put your hand up? Tell her what she should be doing.
It's to go to the best to see the important.
No. In the white shirt? Do you have your hand up? Okay.
Be looking for the subject.
Okay. So, you ask me now what? Ask me a question. My sister? What is? Don't help her. Go then, shout it out. What is the subject? Yes? So we don't know what the most significant word is without knowing the subject. Now, we're all, depending on what day it is, we're either experts or we're trainees on understanding that inspiration is multifaceted. In one verse, one paragraph, one book, you can have many what? Many subjects. It's not just one subject, you could have many subjects. We might call it many themes. Many subjects, many themes. We can look at things in different ways. We all agree with that, yes? Because that's what makes this movement so special. We look at things in different ways. Perhaps the way we most would think about that is we look for treasure. We look for treasure that's hidden, which means no one else can see it. Hidden treasure means it's a different subject than what most people recognise. Is everyone okay with that? So when I say go to 11 verse 40 and I say, tell me what the most significant thought is, you ask, you can't answer the question, you ask, first tell me, what is the subject? I'm the one, the questioner is the one that controls the subject, because you don't know what I'm looking for, what I want to know. So you have to do this by yourself when you study. The first thing you need to know is what? If you don't know the subject, you don't know what the significant thought is. So you have to know the subject. What are you looking for? What's your objective? When you know your objective, then you can find out what is significant. Yep. So when we looked at this, rule number 1, we've gone through all this. What is the thought, what is the subject that we're looking at? Sister Joy brought it to us. What's the subject, Brother Rogers?
Why are we more significant?
Why are we more significant than everyone else? That was the subject. I took you to Hebrews 11 verse 40 and I want to apply rule number 1. Rule number 1 says, what is the most significant thought in this verse connected to the subject. Is everybody okay with all of that? Yeah? I want to ask my brother who's sitting next to Sister Emma. Yeah? On her left. Yeah? Tell me what the most significant thought is in Hebrews 11 verse 14.
I'm seeing a better things.
Sorry? So you want to say better thing. So that's the most significant thought for you. Better thing. So we're going to have different answers because people view these things differently. So remember, he had better thought. I've seen lots of hands up. I just want to look for a couple of people. Brother William, for you, the most significant thought. Just tell us the answer. You don't have to have the preamble.
Okay, I could agree with the...
Sorry?
I think it's...
No, just give us the answer.
The better things.
Better things, the same. Better thing. It says thing, not things, by the way. We changed it. Someone who put their hand up here? Okay, my brother?
They without us.
They without us. So we've got better thing and they without us. In the blue? Yeah?
Us.
Us? Yeah. Which word? Thought? Same. Us?
I wanted to just place without us.
Sorry?
Without us.
Without us. Okay?
Without us, no protection for them.
Without us?
No protection for them.
No
Protection for them.
perfection. Okay? Anyone else?
I think the plan.
Plan? We look for the words itself. Let's not change the words. Does it say plan or am I missing something? But I want the words that's significant, not the paraphrase of it.
What is significant here is the plan.
No, I understand what you're saying, but what I want is the actual words themselves. That's in the verse. I want you to tell me what word is significant or what words, not the concept. He's using what? Ah, okay, I apologise. I'm sorry. What version are you using? A revised version? Okay, a revised version. So let's try and stick with the King James if we're going to do this, because it makes it difficult otherwise. Okay, so, yeah. Provided. So what I would suggest, I think we have probably most people gravitated to this, is they without us. Because the subject that we were speaking about is who's most significant? These people are most significant because look how much information we have about them, Mr. Joy said. And I asked, well, aren't we more significant than them? We're priests after all. And why were we more significant than them? So we gravitated to the subject of the harvest. So people weren't given the answer that I was looking for. So I went to this one, and it served to remind us or teach us about how rule number 1 would work, how we should use it, I'm suggesting. And the subject was, who's more significant, them or us? And it says right in the verse, they and us. They and us. So we put the words in between them. They without us. So, are these people significant without us? No, they're not significant without us. We're the most significant. So when we think about harvest, what concept do we use when we say they, without us, will not work, won't happen? It doesn't say that, it says it in the other way in the verse. But in concept, it says they without us, the thing cannot happen. In this context, perfection can't happen. But in the model of harvest, what can't happen? They without us. Put your hands up, someone. My sister? They can't be harvested without us. Same? Sorry? Okay, so what makes priests so significant is that the priests are the first fruits. Without the first fruits, you cannot move forward. So even though we don't have, and I'm pretty sure we don't have as much information here as we do for God's people, what makes us more significant than them is that they without us cannot be harvested. And that term, or the phrase that we use, or the symbol, is first fruits. So we're the first fruits, which makes us the most important thing, because without us nothing can move forward. These things are, I'm not saying these things are significant, they're not profound, but I'm using them to serve a purpose, to help us think about concepts, how we approach our reading, and also to introduce us, or to remind us about how we use rules, what significance they have, in a meaningful, practical way. There's things that we speak about, like all of these ones, which we don't touch upon, but I think they have meaning. I like the one about, this is the hand of God, and it's also the foundation. So when you start thinking about those terms, I think they have a lot of significance about, these are the foundational rules that we should build everything upon. And if it's repeat and enlarge, you've got two foundations. If we were to start thinking about two foundations, we perhaps might think about the two charts, which are the two foundations. There's many things that you can begin to open up your studies, your personal studies, when you start thinking in this way. Someone had their hand up.
May I know this in the verse? What did you say the day? That day is our rest.
I'm not sure I understand your question, I'm sorry.
So I say that, what did you say, or what do you say in the day in the verse? Or the verse is saying that that day without us should not be made perfect.
When you say best, what do you mean best? I'm sorry. In the verse, start again.
Yeah. So in the verse,
yes.
So it is said that day. What is the day then?
Okay, I'll change it from not what is the day, but who are the day. Yeah? So in its original context, it says they without us. So who is that speaking about if you want to go back to the original context? Because I didn't use original context. I jumped a couple of steps and I made an application because I wanted to get the original and most important thought from this passage. So the original context, who are the they and who are the us?
Us are apostles and they are the people who died before the time.
Okay, are you okay with that answer? Us are, you said?
Apostles.
He said the apostles. Maybe we can broaden it to all those people that were alive then. Maybe we could say the disciples, the apostles, Ephesus, the Church of God. Those who were the disciples of Christ, maybe we could just say the Christians. So all those people that died before us, they cannot be made perfect without the Christians. Were you asking rhetorically or were you asking that you don't know? You have an opinion?
Yeah, I have an opinion.
Okay. So I don't like rhetorical questions in classes, please. It's the first and last time. Don't do that in my class. Tell us what you think it means.
Yeah, what I was thinking is that when I go to the verse, say that God having provided some better things for us. So, and the one who is speaking here, so is Paul. So, and put comma that day without us should not be perfect. So I was saying that the last sentence, so if the repeat of the first one, because the has here used without us is the same as so in the first sentence. So and they, so I take it to be the better thing. So the better things, so in the day and us are the apostles. So this is the way I actually conceptualize it.
Okay, so that's the same thing that my brother said, that us are the apostles. But I think we can broaden it to the Christians. If we want to say what the better thing is, you have to come out of the verse. You have to understand the context to know what the better thing is, if we wanted to do that. Does anybody want to tell us what the better thing is? My brother?
I think the better thing is God having provided some better things.
Just tell us what the better thing is.
So the better thing is, the way I'm saying, I'm not thinking like him. The better thing is not the things that we have, that they have, the message, like the message that Paul was having in hand, the message about the fulfillment of what has been, what those people have been longing for, and they are now.
So the better thing is the fulfillment. Yeah? So if we just drop down, sorry, no, not drop down. We go up one verse. What's the better thing? Someone shout out. The promise. You can see that? So the promise is Christ. The better thing is Christ. It's the fulfillment of all of their hopes and their dreams. Okay, so we'll come out of that. So I just wanted to make the point that these are significant, but we're more significant. We've used some rules to show that. We've looked at rule number 1. Does anybody have any questions about the usage of rule number 1 and how to, the changes that we made, why we made those changes, and what use it is now to us when we look at it this way? We've changed rule number 1 from every word has its proper bearing upon the subject at hand, and we've changed that, all of that rule to mean the most significant thought. I personally think it's a much more pragmatic, useful approach to the rule itself, and I think it tells you how to use the rule in a real life situation. For me. So I don't know if anybody else wants to ask any questions or have any comments on rule number 1. If it's rule number 1, it must be the most important rule, I would suggest. Rule number 14 would be its counterpart, and rule number 5 and rule number 14 are very similar. The back end of rule number 5 is almost the same as rule 14. Question?
Yeah. Okay, you said before that if you go to Greek, then you see that some of the words are not there. So how will I know when I do my study that these words were just to make, to make the reading to be just to flow smooth? So how will I identify that these words were not there in Greek and the other one were not there?
Okay, so the question is, how do we know what's significant? Because not all the words are there in the first place. Yeah, when you go from Greek to English, or you go from Hebrew to English. My sister, how would you approach it? How would you answer someone? It's a common question. Yeah. How would you approach my brother's question? All of those words aren't even in the Greek.
I even had a question similar to that.
Ah, so what's your question?
Okay, it's like you see rule number 1, like every word must have its word there. They maintain to more significant thoughts, right? Now, my question would be that if we try to preach a verse like this verse, do you approach it with a free mind or when you have trust? Because you're like...
Free mind or
we had some thoughts that led us to this verse. Like at first, for us to come here, you were asking, what makes us more significant than the 11 hour, right? And this is what brought us to this verse. So my question would be, do we come to the verse with a free mind to come and take the subject and the most significant thought, or we approach it with the intent, with an intent?
Okay, so when you say a free mind, what I guess you mean, tell me if I'm wrong, is you just open the Bible up and you have a random verse. Is that what you mean by free mind? So should we be conducting our studies in a random fashion or a directed fashion? Is that your question?
Let me first get.
Okay, free thought means random, and the other way, I can't remember how you expressed it, but with a direction, with a thought behind it. Sorry?
Yeah, because we try to express that because, like, to my understanding, there we've now found the subject of this verse, and the most significant word is different from the question that you brought up. Like, why are we more significant than the other people?
So let me rephrase what you said. You've said, I've engineered all of this because I had a goal in mind. I already knew what the verse said. So I took you to this, all manufactured. I manufactured this. Because I already knew the answer. That's what... Everyone was going to come to the same conclusion that I wanted you to come to.
No, not that.
Okay, not that?
I was like, if you approach me and tell me what is the subject of this verse and the most significant word, I would come to a different conclusion. But with first asking me the question, then taking me the verse, of course I would conclude in a way that I would answer your question.
So if you're doing a study, you want to find out something, yeah? You want to do a study on the second advent. So I would think that there's always a direction or a question or a thought that launches any study. You're interested in something. So if you're interested in a subject, a theme, what you want to do is you want to read verses, any verse, but the subject you already know. You know the subject before you approach the verse. Do you agree with that? So, I don't know if you've asked it this way, but is that the way we should do things? Or should we just wake up and say, we're going to do our devotion today, and we'll just pick up any random verse, and we'll say, Ezekiel 3:1. We'll read Ezekiel 3:1. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, eat that thou findest, eat this roll, and go speak unto the house of Israel. So, if I were to ask, what is the significant thought that we could get there from that? In order to answer that question, I think you would have to ask yourself, what is the subject? And if you're going to do it in that random fashion, and I were to ask you, what are you learning from that verse? How is it helping you? I think you would have to say, well, I've got a problem in life, or I've got an issue at church, or I'm a preacher, or I'm an Adventist. You would have to know something about yourself in order to find out what significance that would have for you. So I would contend that you need to know your subject first. And the subject depends upon you. You create that with your imagination, with the desires of your heart. Once you have that direction, then you go to Bible passages and you see how they will help you or guide you or teach you about your subject. So I think the subject has to be your subject, not one that's given to you in Scripture, in order to understand what is the significant thought or idea that you should get from that passage. You respond.
Yeah, it will be twofold to my understanding because we're going to have the intent and maybe the application of how we going to apply it and we'll see how it is significant to the question being brought up. And to understand it here, the way it has been answered by the brothers, like when the brother asked him, what did he say? It's like he was like, he was talking that the day are the better things, something like that.
Okay, I can't fully remember exactly what he said, but carry on.
Yeah, but I was trying to start concern that it will be different from the main intent here. When you try to review the previous verses, we'll see that the intent, and then we would apply it with a little bit different. Because for us to apply it would be like the us are really oppressed, and the they would be the Levites, and we are more better than them.
And Paul applies it. Us is
They.
Is him.
Is him
And they.
And his colleagues. Then they, in the verse here, are the forefathers. Like
The people who came before him.
Yeah.
Sure.
So they are more significant than them because of what happened at that time. When Christ came.
Yes.
You see that?
Of course.
But if we interpret this verse with the thought of the question you brought up, we will answer it in a different way. It won't be as it is in the instance.
Yes. So that's why I said you don't know what's significant unless you know the subject. So you've introduced the concept of original intent and application. So sometimes that is important to understand. But in other verses, there is no original intent. Or the original intent is not so straightforward to understand. Especially when you come to prophetic verses, not historical ones. Because this is a historical statement. He's talking about his dispensation, about what's going on. And you can work out relatively easily what the intent of his subject is. And then you can find out for him what the most significant thing is. So you can approach it that if you're going to find out what's significant for Paul, then you need to know what is significant for us. And they may or may not be the same thing. In fact, they really should be the same thing, because what's significant for him is significant for us, but it may mean something different. So we're venturing now into the concept of application, of what do we do with those passages and how do they work for us. So we could apply it in exactly the same way he did. And it would have been exactly the same. If I were to ask, what is the most significant thought? It would have been the same answer, because he is the person who's living when the prophecies are being fulfilled. And therefore, what makes him significant is because he's there. I'm going to repeat myself. When they're all fulfilled. So how would we apply that to us? We'd say the same things. We could say that them would be the Millerites, or Paul, or the same people he's referring to. Because he's applying himself to those who are living in the fulfillment, and that's exactly who we are. So we could apply it in exactly the same way he originally intended, and it would still be the same important thought that I would suggest in that verse. But we just looked at it slightly differently when we said they and us, because I wanted to ask, I think that they are the same people, us. The them is either people who died before us or the people who are coming in front of us, depending upon the subject. And the subject that I was being guided by was the subject of harvest. He's being guided by a different issue, a different subject. So I just want to address the question about Greek and English. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with messing around with Greek and English? Are you going to answer your own question?
No.
Okay.
Because this question was like, how do we know that, how do we know the word is already Greek or Hebrew, and the word is added? make us understand, right?
Yeah.
So I think specifically in this verse, there are like 17 words. And according to my understanding, I can say that the word which were originally here are 14.
Okay, so before you carry on, just want to remind us, please don't give me rhetorical questions. If you know the answer to your own question, please don't ask a question. I only ask questions in this class if you don't know the answer and you want someone to help you. Okay, but carry on. Yeah, but it was your question. I don't need to answer your own questions. Carry on. Who asked the question? Oh, he asked the question. Sorry, carry on then. I thought you had asked it.
So I will suggest that
I apologise.
the word which were originally here are 14 words.
In the Greek, there are 14 words you counted.
Because how did I do that? The numbers which are here, which are code, which you can use to put these words, are 14 codes.
14?
Numbers.
In English or Greek? I got 11. How did you get 14?
Pardon?
I got 11. How did you get 14?
I counted the numbers.
I counted 11. Are we using different versions? No, I'm serious. I've got. If you've got an interlinear, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. I've got 11 words. You've got 3 more than me.
You're using King James, using a different Bible.
You using King James? Okay. We'll talk later. Anyway, it's a different number.
So I have 14 numbers.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the word are 17. I mean that the word which has numbers are the original English word. And the one which has no, I think those are the English word which were used to make us understand.
Okay. So his question was, which word do you do then?
It's like, how do you know that this was Greek and this is English which was good to make you understand it?
Yep.
Yeah. Then I am saying, no Greek, you see the word with number, that is great. Or if the word without number, it was hard to make you understand.
Is that the answer to his question? I thought that's the explanation of what the issue is, as opposed to answering his difficulty. He's asking, I've got added words here which are not in the original. How can an added word be significant if it's not even God's word?
I think according to how I understand this question, it's like, how do we know that this was not a Greek word or English?
Was that your question?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what your question was.
My question was that because you say that there are some words which can be added when people were translating.
Yep.
So the question was this: how are you going to know that this word was added? And are you going to consider them or not?
Okay, so that's what I thought. I thought your question was. It's easy to find out which ones are added and which ones weren't. But I think what's significant, or most important about your question is, what do we do with them? Do we consider added words? That to me was the point of the question, I think. My brother?
Finally, so I just listed some of Daniel 8:5-12.
Who used that Daniel 8:12?
Which Millers used to understand.
Oh, Miller. Okay.
So let's assume that sacrifice was not italicized. The concept of italics was not there. How do we understand that what was added? So I suggest if we understand the subject of that part, the one is subject, we can put our minds and understand that maybe that one sacrifice is added because the sacrifices would mean something else apart from the subject of that part.
Okay, so in this passage there are no italicized words, so they're all in the original. But as my brothers pointed out, some of those words are added in. They're not there in the original. But they're not italicized either. Over this side, someone. Okay, brother? Yeah?
when we see this, myself, I will use the knowledge of summary.
Summary?
Yeah. When I see how this goes, I look into the words that we just used is to make the meaning. And when I take my knowledge of summary, then I know that most significant words I have to kick out. And those words must be the words those words must be the original. Must be the original ones. So like hobby was God provided. God provided. But English says God hobby provided. So I will definitely know that hobby is an English word that support hobby provided. Okay? Like also be made perfect. Okay? I can just say not made perfect, not be perfect than made. Okay, made sometimes. It also make meanings. So when I use my knowledge of summary, it's going to be simple for me rather than for others.
Do you need to know Greek to do that?
No.
My brother? With the, I think, red top? Any thoughts? No? The sister behind him? No thoughts? The brother behind her?
What I would think is, I will follow the rules, so long as my subject which I'm looking at concurs with the word it is, whether added or not added, gives me the meaning which I'm focusing my subject on. I can use it.
So, if they're added words that aren't in the original, what are you saying about that?
You can use them if, depending on the subject you are focusing on, is the most significant word to bring up the meaning. Because when they translate, these words have more meaning than the English word is there. What the translators do, they want to bring out the full meaning of the word, but they are limited with the English language. What they can do, they can just add some of these words to make the right meaning of the original people of this language.
Okay, so I'd like to ask more questions on this, but I'm going to, because the class is coming to an end, I just give an approach that I would suggest. We'll talk about it in the next class if we want to continue it. So, some verses are complicated and others are much easier to deal with. So there's a level of complexity. When you approach a verse, if you just approach it in the English, and it's safe we all agreed that we'd first start with the King James Version. The reason why some people don't is because the language in the King James is a little bit difficult, cumbersome to deal with. So if you take a verse and read it in the King James, and if it's all relatively easy to understand, you just leave it there. You do not need to go to the Greek and the Hebrew. So you're assuming that the translators have done a good job. You have to assume that, because if you don't, even if you go to the Greek or Hebrew, what are you relying upon then? Which verse? Which rule? It's going down to rule number 5. The Bible should be its own expositor. So we'll discuss a little bit about that in our next class. But you have to trust that the translator did a good job. So if it's an easy verse and you can assess whether or not they did a good job or not, you just leave it in the English. If the verse is slightly complex or problematic and you're struggling to find the key thought or the most significant thought, then what you would do is you'd go back to the original language and make sure that the translation in the English was done well. So, I think has been noted, it says, God having provided. Having provided, 2 words, the thought in the Greek means to provide. That would be the nearest approximation, it's a singular word in Greek, in English it would mean to provide. So instead of it's saying God to provide some better thing, first of all, they're going to put a tense in it to say provided to make it flow, and they're going to change to into having. Already done something. So God having provided. So having provided is a word that in the Greek actually means to provide if you look at Strong's. So is that an accurate translation? It is. So therefore we can reliably know that having provided is correct. When you look at the tense, that it's in the past, God already did something, already prepared it, because he had something in mind. He already knew what was going to happen at the end. There's all that built into the English, and I think there has to be a level of trust that it all gets translated correctly. So, to answer the questioner, whatever it says in the English, I don't think you need to worry what the added words were or what the original words were. It doesn't really make that much difference, because the added words are only there, as my brother said at the back, to help you to understand the original words. They're there to aid and assist. So when we say what are the most significant words, having provided, if we were going to have a discussion on this, we all would know that provided would be the most significant word. Even without going to the original, you would know that. But we have a collective thought, having provided. If a verse is complex, then you have to go to the original language to make sure that everything is being translated correctly. And sometimes it isn't, because the translators have brought their own humanity into that verse. And when we approach it, obviously we bring our own humanity into these verses, but there's a difference between the translators and us, isn't there? Yeah? The translators were speaking about whom? Us. We are the subject of these passages. The translators were just writing about us. So the way we approach a passage would be different to the way the translators would approach the subject. The translators would say, we don't know what's going on here. We're just going to write as best as we understand what this passage means. But when we read differently, which goes back to your question. When we talk about the subject matter, why are we even studying in the first place? What we're doing is not an objective study, is it? Are we doing objective studies? No. They're subjective. I don't know if we feel frightened or afraid about that concept, because maybe we think we should be objective. But of course we shouldn't be objective, we should be subjective. Is Paul subjective when he writes? Of course he is. He's going to take all those Old Testament passages and do what? And he's going to bend them to his own needs, his own desires, his own significance, his own wants. And we do the same. He bends all of the Old Testament to suit his dispensation. So when he reads, he doesn't do what the Septuagint authors would do, which would basically write the Hebrew, put it into Greek, and they would be subjective or objective. They would be objective. They were scholars. We're not scholars. Paul, when he writes, he's not doing what the Hebrew scholars did. He's taken those verses and turning them into subjective statements to make an application to what he wants those verses to mean for him. And that's what we do. That's why we don't have to be overly focused upon the objectivity of the original and the King James. We're much more subjective. We're much more flexible, if we can say it that way. Have a think about that, and we'll look at that in our next class. I'll be taking the next class after breakfast. And also when we think about rule number 5. Look about rule number 5. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. We ask and pray that you would guide, direct and bless us. Lord, help us as we meditate upon your word, to think on these things. May they have a moulding and changing influence upon us. We ask for a blessing, Lord, not only on our study, but on the food that we're to eat, and for our time together today. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.